Hello. Okay, the book I'm going to introduce to you tonight for your holiday reading is The Year of Wonders by Geraldine Brooks. Geraldine Brooks was an ABC journalist in Sydney and now lives in Massachusetts, I believe the state of Massachusetts in the US with her husband and two sons. She is amazing at going back in time and recreating what life would have been like in different historic periods and creating believable characters. In this one, she goes back to 1666 in Britain, the year of the Great Plague. She starts off leaf fall time, apple picking time, and she writes this story from the point of view of a scullery maid, I suppose, or definitely a maid, Sarah. And it starts off apple picking time. I used to love this season, the wood stacked by the door, the tang of its sap still speaking of forest, the hay made all golden in the low afternoon light, the rumble of the apples tumbling into the cellar bins, smells and sights and sounds that said this year it would be all right, there'd be food and warmth for the babies by the time the snows came. I used to love to walk in the apple orchard at this time of the year, to feel the soft give underfoot when I trod on a fallen fruit. Thick, sweet scents of rotting apple and wet wood. This year the haystooks are few, and the woodpiles scant, and neither matters much to me. They brought the apples yesterday, a cartload for the rectory cellar. Late pickings, of course. I saw brown spots on more than a few. I had words with the carter over it, but he told me we were lucky to get as good as we got, and I suppose it's true. There are so few people to do the picking. So few people to do anything, and those of us who are left walk around as if we're half asleep. We are all so tired. I took an apple that was crisp and good and sliced it thin as paper and carried it into the dim room where he sits still and silent. His hand is on the Bible, but he never opens it, not any more. I asked him if he'd like me to read it to him. He turned his head to look at me, and I started. You cannot read, Anna. To be sure I can, Rector. Mrs. Montpellion taught me. He winced and turned away. Okay, so his wife has died because of the plague, and he is a rector, but she's not an ordinary servant. She's quite intelligent. She does stay because he's just in despair at the death of his wife, and so she gets in all kinds of mischief from trying to help out this rector because his grief is so huge. Her own partner has died of the plague, and all sorts of awful things, of course, have been going on in the village. The local herbalist ladies have been killed because they've been accused of bringing the plague, even though they were maybe the only ones who could try and help people to make their immune system strong to survive it. And yeah, anyway, so she ends up having all kinds of problems because she ends up sleeping with her former employer because he's just so devastated, and then she finds herself with child. Anyway, and it's just so beautifully rendered. It just goes through all of these happenings because, of course, there were some fleas in a bundle of cloth that was brought up from London, and that's what actually caused the plague. Or was there a rat in a bundle of cloth? Anyway, it takes you back into that time. She needs to leave because she's with child, the brother of her former mistress who's died, wants to take that baby, and she needs to flee on a boat anyway to save the child, and she ends up somewhere in Arabia. She had learnt many things about herbs, and so she ends up in an exotic port in Turkey somewhere, I think, and she's discovered by a holy man who practices Ahmed Bays, cultivates herbs and he is their version of a medical man, and he actually, when he learns of what she has learnt about herbs and delivering babies, he could do with a midwife himself, because the women, he can't actually see the women, and he can only help them through circles cut in cloths on their body. So she actually finds her place and brings up her daughter in this exotic Turkish city. Oh, sorry, in Baghdad. Anyway, although it's a work of fiction, it was inspired by the true story of the villages of Ayam in Derbyshire. I first visited Ayam quite by chance in the summer of 1990. I was based in London then, working as an Middle East correspondent on the Wall Street Journal. Between assignments in hot trouble places like Gaza and Baghdad, I tried to find respite in the English countryside. It was on one of these hikes or rambles, as the English euphonymously call them, that I came upon the intriguing finger post pointing this way to the Plague village. There I found the history of the villagers' ordeal and their extraordinary decision, set out in a display in the parish church of St. Lawrence. There, the story of quarantine and its cost grew more vivid to me. I think they quarantined themselves and no one was allowed in or allowed to leave, so they were very brave. So it's a fascinating story, fascinating about the difference between Eastern and Western medicine and the use of herbs. It doesn't mention it does mention by distance a great fire, which, thank God, cleansed the rats out of London, and just about someone surviving the Black Plague or the Bubonic Plague, the Black Death, and how the people in that village did agree to actually quarantine themselves so that the plague wouldn't spread. So it's well worth reading. So I know you're going to enjoy it. And she is a wonderful writer, Geraldine Brooks. Any book of hers, don't hesitate to have a look at. So The Year of Wonders, by Geraldine Brooks.